This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Wednesday, August 26th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Kenyan authorities and aid agencies say rape and sexual abuse cases against girls have increased since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, and they say in most cases, relatives are the offenders. As Mohammed Yusuf tells us, some safe shelters in Nairobi are overwhelmed by girls who need a safe shelter away from people meant to care for them.
Kenyan children have extra time off since schools closed in March due to the coronavirus pandemic. That is making them more vulnerable to sexual predators. This mother of 5 says a 20-year-old man targeted her teenage daughter at home and got her pregnant.
I started interrogating my daughter. She started to explain how the man will come in the house while I am away, give her 10 to 20 shillings, and take her to another dark building near our place.
Some of the abused children end up in a safe house like this in central Nairobi. The center hosts 26 girls. 17 of them came here between March and July. Florence, who runs the house, says there are many more girls who need a safe home.
We can only take the number that we can really manage. It's so sad that we sometimes deny cases at the gate. So we just say that we can't take them in because we are full.
Kenya's Ministry of Health says it has received at least 5,000 sexual violence cases across the country. 65% of them involve girls below the age of 18, many of whom live in poverty. Officials say in many cases the perpetrators are close to the victims do not believe the abuse is a crime.
They don't know that this is a punishable thing or is a punishable crime, but then now they accept just because their parents cannot afford to provide certain items.
Andisa says she worries that her children are more vulnerable to abuse if schools remain closed. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Nairobi.
Authorities in Zimbabwe's capital say they are facing a severe water shortage and public health concerns as water levels in dams supplying Harare have drastically dropped during the COVID-19 pandemic. Charities are stepping up free water deliveries to poor neighborhoods, but authorities say social distancing is a challenge at public water points. Columbus Mavunga has more from Harare.
Recurring droughts and failure to import water treatment chemicals has resulted in some parts of Harare without tap water. Residents have to depend on open water sources or overcrowded manually pumped boreholes.
We really need serious assistance because you see people are disregarding the coronavirus, whatever measures put on to keep us safe. Constitutionally, I know we are entitled to safety health, safety environment, but this is not giving us that.
In some areas, underground water tables have gone down and bowls are struggling to provide the precious water. Some organizations like Clean City have chipped in with 4 buckets of free water per family. The residents appreciate that gesture.
But my appeal to Clean City must increase the number of Bowsers that bring water here, because some people go home with no water. That results in them looking for water in open sources like wells.
Clean City said it would not comment on the issue. Chideme, the spokesman for the city of Harare, says Zimbabwe's capital is failing to get adequate foreign currency needed to import $3 million worth of water treating chemicals every month.
So we end up buying very little and also treating restricted amounts of water so that we can last longer with the chemicals that we have. Our other problem is to do with our water bodies, Seke and our dam, which complement the Manyame and Lake Chivero dams, have already dried up and we are no longer drawing water from there.
With rains not expected until October, Zimbabwe's water shortages are likely to worsen. That certainly should be bad news when the country is battling to contain coronavirus, which requires strict hygiene practices. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare.
Russia announced earlier this month that it had won the global race to develop the first vaccine against the COVID-19, but the self-proclaimed victory and plans to ramp up production come amid lingering questions about the safety and effectiveness of the Russian drug. From Moscow, Charles Maines reports.
With the world desperate for a vaccine for COVID-19, President Vladimir Putin says Russian scientists have come to the rescue with a shot christened the Sputnik 5.
I know that it's fairly effective and forms sustainable immunity, and I repeat, it's passed all necessary inspections.
The vaccine is the work of the state-run Gamaleya Institute, which says it successfully carried out tests on a group of employees and volunteers, including, says the Russian president, his daughter. But the institute is only now starting the large-scale clinical trials, standard for testing a vaccine's efficacy and safety. That's raising concerns Russia is cutting corners to score global bragging rights and sales.
This isn't about any bias on my part. Do a phase 3 stage of clinic testing and show the vaccine is safe on several thousand people, as is the accepted international norm. We'll be only happy if it works. But right now, it looks like they're rushing the process.
Despite government plans to deploy the vaccine to frontline workers next month, a recent poll finds more than half of all Russian doctors say they would refuse to take the inoculation. The World Health Organization also lists the Russian effort as being in its early stages and is cautioning the Kremlin to go slow with plans to ramp up production in the coming months. Meanwhile, Russian healthcare workers say too many of their own have already paid the ultimate price. In St. Petersburg, a makeshift memorial tracks medical worker deaths amid lingering public doubts that government statistics hide the true cost of fighting the virus.
It was clear that our doctors would be the first to be felled by the pandemic, and so we had the idea of creating a memory wall so that the city would remember those who've been defending them, who have been saving lives.
Russia currently sits fourth in the world infection count, behind the US, Brazil, and India, with nearly 1 million cases. But there's also a sense of public fatigue with social distancing, masks, and other protective measures. Russians are gambling on a return to life resembling normal before the virus, and an unvetted vaccine to save them. Charles Maines for VOA News, Moscow.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with Sudanese Prime Minister Abdullahi on Tuesday in Khartoum. The two men discussed the possibility of Sudan's removal from a U.S. state sponsor of terrorism list, but the Prime Minister told Pompeo that he is not mandated to normalize ties with Israel, and the issue should not be linked to Sudan's removal from a U.S. state sponsors of terrorism list, according to Reuters. Ties with Israel are a sensitive subject in Sudan, which was among the hardline Muslim adversaries of Israel under former Islamist leader Omar al-Bashir. Pompeo's visit to Sudan follows a recent accord between Israel and the UAE to begin full diplomatic relations, and it comes as Israel and the White House push more Arab countries to follow. The United States is restoring relations with Sudan following the ousting of former Islamist leader Omar al-Bashir in 2019. A magistrate in Zambia on Tuesday acquitted Zambian Health Minister Chitalu Chilufya on 4 charges of alleged corruption brought against him by the country's Anti-Corruption Commission. Magistrate Lamek Mwale acquitted the minister after ACC Acting Director General Rosemary Kwazuyo failed to show up in court on Tuesday due to illness. One of the ACC lawyers told the magistrate that he was not told to give further evidence in the case. On social media platforms, some Zambians wanted to know who gave the instructions not to give further evidence and whether that was enough to acquit the health minister. Tutua Gulube, lawyer for Health Minister Chilufya, says the minister is pleased with the acquittal because the government's allegations that he benefited from the supply of ambulances to the government was found to be untrue. A region in Africa that includes 43 nations has been certified free of the wild polio virus after Nigeria, the last endemic country, recorded no new cases for the past 3 consecutive years. Nigeria's polio survivors are celebrating the eradication of the virus, even though many still face challenges. Timothy Obiezu profiles the president of the Polio Survivors Association, who has been helping other survivors through sport.
Misbahu Lawan Didi survived polio as a child, but both of his legs became paralyzed. Unable to enjoy his favorite sports with able-bodied counterparts, he founded the para-soccer game in 1988 for polio survivors to play. Not long after, Nigeria's Polio Survivors Association was created. Survivors like Lawan used their own stories to spread awareness about the polio virus and vaccines.
Many people are rejecting polio based on what they believe. Some believe that it is Western manipulation to reduce the number of Nigerians. Some believe in the religion of Islam that is not accepted, and otherwise everybody has its own belief. And the government always find it difficult to get to some people because they have already decided not to take the oral polio vaccination.
Lawan started the para-soccer game, which is now a national sport with a major tournament held each October to mark World Polio Day. Polio survivors like Bello Abdullahi are para-soccer stars.
I enjoy para-soccer a lot because it's the game I regularly play in. I joined para-soccer, I started to learn para-soccer in 1997 from Lagos. I now pick myself into one of the stars.
Nigeria, the last country on the continent to report cases, has not seen a single case since 2016, when cases surged during unrest in the Borno region.
We could not access kits behind the enemy lines. When the kits started coming out, then it became obvious that there was still some transmission going on in Borno around the Lake Chad region. But beyond all of that, there was insecurity as a result of the Boko Haram insurgency. That is what created many communities that were inaccessible.
After more than 2 decades since Nigeria joined the fight to eradicate polio in Africa, polio survivors are celebrating. But with polio still active elsewhere, authorities say it's important to stay vigilant.
As long as we continue to have 2 endemic countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, then there's always that potential that there will be importation of the wild polio virus to any African country, to Nigeria as it were. So of course that concern is there.
A disability rights group in Nigeria says 40% of people with disabilities in the country are polio survivors, most of whom live in abject poverty. Beyond Nigeria's polio eradication, Misbahu Lawan Didi says he will keep working to give survivors hope through sport. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja.
Tanzania's Electoral Commission Tuesday approved the candidacy of President John Magufuli and his running mate Samia Suluhu Hassan to run in the October 28th election. Tanzania law requires all presidential candidates to submit nomination forms signed by at least 200 guarantors, registered party members. The nomination papers of main opposition Chideme presidential candidate Tundu Lissu were also approved. However, earlier Tuesday, Lissu called VOA to complain about delay in granting his papers. He also complained about armed security people who he says were stationed around the premises of the National Electoral Commission headquarters to arrest and take him into custody. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, the challenge of bridging the digital divide in South Africa. We'll be right back.
The Republican Party is known for favoring a smaller federal government, as well as conservative social policies. However, this was not always the case. The party was founded in 1854 by Northerners who wanted a stronger federal government and who opposed the expansion of slavery in Western states. The party's second ever candidate for president, Abraham Lincoln, wins the presidency in 1860 and goes on to preserve the Union and abolish slavery. Following the North's win of the Civil War, the Republican Party dominates the nation's politics for the next 70 years. During this time, the party champions an expansion of federal power. Party leaders also back the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing the vote for African American men. The party's dominance comes crashing down with the Great Depression. Democrats blame the economic collapse on Republican pro-business policies. Over the next 50 years, Democrats mostly control national politics, with only one Republican president gaining power. Republicans develop a conservative response to the Democrats' expansion of the federal government that started during the Great Depression. The changing policies of the parties leads to a demographic switch, with many African Americans moving to the Democratic Party and many Southern whites switching to the Republican Party. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan wins over a large majority of the country with his policies. In recent decades, Democrats and Republicans trade control over the presidency. Recent Republican presidents George W. Bush and Donald Trump champion an even smaller role for the federal government and move further right on social policies.
Welcome back to Africa 54. On the second night of the four-day U.S. Republican National Convention, First Lady Melania Trump offered her case for a second term for President Donald Trump, joining others, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who broke with tradition and delivered his speech from Jerusalem. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has the recap.
From the White House Rose Garden, First Lady Melania Trump sought to convince Americans that her husband deserves a second term, addressing a key concern among voters.
Donald will not rest until he has done all he can to take care of everyone impacted by this terrible pandemic.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo delivered remarks from Jerusalem, breaking protocol of State Department employees avoiding openly partisan activities while abroad.
The President, too, moved the U.S. Embassy to this very city of God, Jerusalem, the rightful capital of the Jewish homeland.
Pompeo highlighted Trump's recent announcement of the normalization of relations between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, a deal rejected by Palestinians. He also reminded voters of Trump's America First doctrine.
So I think you will continue to see gestures to what the Trump presidency thinks are its wins. And I think Pompeo's appearance in Jerusalem is probably the chief among those gestures, and also meant to mobilize voters who really care about Israel.
Following Donald Trump Jr.'s speech on Monday, siblings Eric and Tiffany also touted their father's achievements.
On Tuesday, Trump again made appearances from the White House, breaking tradition from presidential nominees who usually stay out of the limelight until the last night of the convention.
Despite his hardline immigration policies, Trump witnessed the naturalization ceremony of 5 new Americans, another first in convention history.
You've earned the most prized, treasured, cherished, and priceless possession anywhere in the world. It's called American citizenship.
While former Presidents Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter spoke at last week's Democratic National Convention, former Republican President George W. Bush is not featured this week. He and his late father, former President George H.W. Bush, also sat out the RNC 2016 convention.
I think what this speaks to is the revolution in the party that Donald Trump has effected over 4 years. He has changed the Republican Party more than any man since Ronald Reagan.
Vice President Mike Pence will formally accept his nomination in a speech scheduled for Wednesday. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
The nation's contentious debate over Second Amendment rights and gun control legislation took center stage in both parties' presidential conventions this month. Republicans highlighted the issue Monday night is a St. Louis, Missouri couple who drew attention for pointing guns at Black Lives Matter protesters in front of their home earlier this year, spoke in support of President Donald Trump. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more on the key differences on guns between Trump and his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden.
The right to bear arms. A right enshrined in the U.S. Constitution that President Donald Trump contends will be taken away by Democrats if they win the White House.
They will take your guns away as sure as you're standing or sitting there. They will take your guns away. Either that or obliterate the Second Amendment.
Second Amendment rights have always held an important place in the American political discussion because of the role of guns in the country's founding.
In the name of being able to prevent a tyrannical government. And so because of this desire to have that protection at all times, it undergirds and kind of flows through all of American society.
Gun rights highlighted on the first night of the Republican National Convention by Missouri attorneys Mark and Patricia McCloskey. The couple became famous on social media after pointing guns at Black Lives Matter protesters in front of their home.
President Trump will defend the God-given right of every American to protect their homes and their families.
Gun rights supporters argue restricting guns isn't the answer. The father of a young woman who died in the Parkland High School shooting in 2018 says Trump made the right choice supporting tough school safety policies.
I truly believe the safety of our kids depends on whether this man is reelected.
But frequent mass shootings in recent years have fueled protests calling for gun control legislation. Most Americans support some gun law restrictions, according to public opinion polling. It's an issue with such strong consensus that it was highlighted at the Democratic National Convention last week.
Focusing on the gun violence reduction policies is a place where it can unite pretty much everybody in the Democratic Party's tent. So it makes sense to focus on that as opposed to something that might be a little more contentious.
If elected, former Vice President Biden says he would institute universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons, and a push for red flag laws that would take guns away from people considered a risk to themselves or others. Crucial reforms, says former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who was severely wounded by a gunman 9 years ago.
We can let the shooting continue, or we can act. We can protect our families, our future. We can vote. We can be on the right side of history. We must elect Joe Biden.
In an election in which so many issues are high stakes, analysts say guns are still a key concern.
There are a few that really hold a high profile in the American voters' mind, and one of those is gun rights. So there are a lot of single-issue voters who will literally go down the ballot and pick the candidates that fall in line with that one issue.
According to a Pew Research survey this month, 55% of registered voters said gun policy will be a very important part of their vote in the 2020 election. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
In our tech report, 5G is being hailed as the next frontier in wireless technology, better able to handle more users, lots of sensors, and heavy traffic. In South Africa, mobile operators started rolling out 5G networks in urban areas such as Johannesburg and Cape Town earlier this year. However, some areas are still struggling to connect using 3G. Africa 54 technology reporter Paul Ndiho has more.
In townships like Soweto, a digital divide is growing. 5G is quickly becoming the new technological standard for wireless networks that promises a faster internet speeds, but before it can be used, wireless companies have to make upgrades. Joyce Mwangama, a senior lecturer in the Department of Electrical Engineering at the University of Cape Town, warns it will be a long time before 5G mobile connectivity reaches ordinary South Africans.
Sub-Saharan Africa has always lagged in terms of mobile technology penetration. If we look at the current rollout trend for 3G, about a few years ago, it was only 28% of sub-Saharan Africa that was connected, and the expectation is that in 2025 it will be 62%.
Wireless companies are preparing for 5G upgrade. They are revamping their network equipment, buying large units of radio spectrum for carrying 5G signals, and installing new 5G antennas on cell phone towers, utility poles, and street lights.
When we're talking about 5G, the penetration is going to be quite slow, and it'll only in the beginning stages be deployed in small islands, in small pockets, where the mobile network operators feel like they can get a huge uptake of usage from the users.
According to Zoltan, General Manager of Network Planning at the telecommunications firm MTN South Africa, says 5G will eventually give more people access to faster internet once smartphone devices are more accessible.
In South Africa, for example, your fixed line penetration is quite low. It's below 10%. So what you find is that a number of these areas will not get fiber very quickly. So 5G gives you the potential to offer fiber-like services in these areas.
Experts say 5G's most immediate impact on consumers will be faster internet connections, download speeds for video content, also helping companies automate their factories and offering businesses dedicated high-speed internet lanes.
You have to think about how people currently use their phones today and whether or not that speed makes a difference. If you are downloading files, absolutely, you're going to notice, taking, instead of 3 to 6 minutes to download a video, it's going to happen in, half the time.
Ultimately, experts say it will take a few years for 5G to go national. And even then, many rural areas of South Africa may never be covered. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.
Our Voices is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them
and bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.